Marriage is not a natural thing. Marriage is a purposeful contract. The origins of marriage are tied to economics, to patriarchy, slavery, ownership of people. Now, you're hearing me say this and you're thinking, oh, this guy's a Marxist. This guy believes in some kind of sexual liberation or something. But I'm stating the truth, that the left is basically correct in their analysis, but they're wrong in their principles. So the left will say things like, the purpose of marriage is to inhibit human instinct, but they might not say it that way. They'll say the purpose of marriage is to imprison the human spirit. But I would say that the human spirit, what it means to be human, there's at least a dual nature, if not a trinitarian nature. And we can look at the structure of the brain, the quote-unquote lizard brain that we share with lizards, the ape-like brain that we share with apes, and then we have our frontal lobe that's basically unique. The size of our frontal lobe is unique to us among primates. But you could even boil this down to a dualistic aspect, and you could say the animal versus the angel. The animal wants what's good in the short term. The animal doesn't conceive of a long term. The animal has pleasure and the animal has pain. So the animal seeks out pleasure. The animal flees away from pain or fights against pain or has this fight or flight reaction. This is the animal brain. This is the animal part of the human being. Now, the angelic part is the part that sees into the future. This is the perennial part. This is the part that does not focus on the immediate present, but sees the eternal now, sees the past, present, and future from a kind of third eye, an overhead view, seeing all of them equally, seeing past, present, and future as one and the same. So the fact that I might gain animal pleasure from an experience in the short term means nothing from an angelic perspective, because what's concerned there is the entire spectrum of chronology, not just the present. So from this perspective, we can see that the sexual revolution is a revolution of the animal against the and so in that sense it is, metaphorically represented by the rebellion of, Satan against God, right? The angels being corrupted into animals. That's what the sexual revolution is. So marriage is an angelic contract. It's a contract that says, okay, we might love each other today, yesterday, tomorrow, but we're going to be bound to this contract no matter what our feelings are. Feelings can change. You can be in love with someone one day and hate them the next day. People change in their feelings. People change in their attitudes. Circumstances change. You might marry someone when they're rich and then they become poor. You might marry someone when they're healthy and they might become sick. Marriage is a way to basically imprison the Pandora's box of the animal nature of human beings and to say we're going to limit that. There's some kind of monogamy here. There's some kind of security here. There's some kind of long-term, even an eternal situation. Some people conceive of marriage as not just existing within the lifetime of that person, but extending into the afterlife, extending into eternity. So people who are married would then be married in heaven. People who are married here on earth. For instance, in the rituals of Norse pagans and Hindus, wives would be killed and burned alive with their husbands when those husbands died, because they were conceived in that marriage as being inseparable, that if one died, if the man died, then the woman would have to go with him. Now, it was always patriarchal, because if a woman died, the man never killed himself, he just got a new wife. Okay, so it was a one-way hierarchical relationship of the woman being subordinate, the woman being dependent. Now, from the animal perspective, women are supreme, and the wishes of women and the wants of women and the tendencies of women All of that is supreme because the woman possesses the reproductive function in its extreme sense. The man plays a role, but his role is very limited, right? And the cost of reproduction for men is very small. It's, maybe 30 minutes to an hour of your time, 30 seconds of your time, Now, we're not talking about all the investment that goes into monogamous relationships. We're putting that aside for a second. We're saying that the sex act itself, for a man, very limited involvement. The physicality of it, the physics of it, the biology of it, very inexpensive for men to reproduce. For women, very expensive. 9-month procedure. There's the childbirth, and then there's the fact that women are taking care of the children, right? So with all of that set up, if we're looking at things from an animal perspective, the woman is supreme, and the wants of the woman are supreme, and her body is what matters, because you could have one man, and he could supply, theoretically, without taking into account the fact of recessive genes and inbreeding, depression, and that sort of thing. But theoretically, one man could supply enough reproductive material for an entire, population of women. Whereas if you have one woman and many different men, then you're screwed, right? You can't make hay with that. You're not going to be successful with that in any case. So obviously, women are more important than men. Women are more valuable than men from an animal perspective. But from an angelic perspective, right? The man, he has the ability to go beyond the immediacy of the carnal reproduction. That's not the focus of his essence. The focus of his essence in a monogamous society is that he's working his whole life to get that education, to get the job, to get the career, to get the money, to get the house, to get the car. He's trying to get all these things to prove his value to women. He's trying to prove that he has a mind which is capable of learning from the past and conceiving of a future and bringing that into the present. He's capable of this angelic perspective, stepping back, not living in the moment. Well, living in the moment, but taking the past and present into the moment with him. So this is kind of what the angelic perspective is. We could also talk about bodybuilding, right? And you might think that bodybuilding is this animal thing, but when a man dedicates time and money and effort to his diet and to his physique and going to the gym, doing that unnecessarily, women recognize that as he's deferring pleasure, he's embracing pain for some kind of long-term benefit, some aesthetic benefit, you could say even an artistic benefit, and that's attractive. So the woman is attracted to the angelic mind of the man. He represents his internal angelic nature through the outward expression of material things. That's his body, how he treats his body. It's his wealth, it's his education, it's the way that he speaks. It's his musical talent. So if a man forgoes the immediate cycle of pleasure and pain, and he studies an instrument, right? He studies how to play the guitar. The guitar takes patience, and patience is evidence of an angelic mind. So when a woman sees a man playing a guitar skillfully, she sees that evidence of the angelic mind. She's attracted to that, right? You have the opposites, the angelic, the animal. Now, basically, the problem with the sexual revolution is you just say, we're only going to have the animal. We're just going to completely throw out the angelic. And there's always a constant struggle between the two. And ultimately, if you have a society of people where the vast majority, millions of people, are of an animalistic mind. They're focused purely on the material for the material's sake. They're focused on the value of women coming first. What does it mean? What does sexual harassment mean? What does rape mean? When we talk about these problems, we're talking about mostly women's problems. We're not talking about promiscuity. We're not talking about lasciviousness. Those are men's problems. That when a man talks about the problem of promiscuity or the problem of lasciviousness, He's saying that there's women who are distracting me, or there are women who are breaking their marriage vows, or there are women who are not fitting within the monogamous system, which is organized for the production of an angelic attitude in society. When you have a woman-focused society, a material-focused society, millions of people, what that means is that the people lose track of power. They lose track of sovereignty. It kind of escapes them because, as the Greeks said, your passions are like a horse, and your ability to control your passions, that's your angelic mind, is kind of the rider steering the horse. If you don't have an angelic mind about you, if you don't have the ability to defer pleasure, embrace pain, embrace suffering, embrace self-sacrifice, to be patient, to be attentive, if you don't have that ability, then you are like a person who doesn't know how to ride a horse on a stallion, a wild, mare or a stallion. You're just being dragged around, basically. The passions are going to take you wherever they want. And that leaves you weak, and that leaves you vulnerable, because as we know about animals are easily manipulated. You look at the bison in the American West, where you had hunters who would go after the bison and drive them off cliffs. And the bison were stupid enough, they had this herd mentality, they just went off the side of the cliff. When you are subject to your animal passions, your pleasure and your pain, you are very easily manipulated. And that is the problem when you construct a society based on the principle of embracing this animal sexual revolution. You create a society of very easily manipulated people who don't even know that they're being manipulated, who are not even conscious of manipulation, or if they are, they don't care. Like telling the animals in the farm that they're going to be slaughtered, and they don't even understand what that means. Or they don't care, they're apathetic about it. So if you have a society of angelic people who are not concerned with material things, who don't place a huge, they don't outweigh the issues of women, or they do so to the opposite. You have a society that's concerned with the past and the present and the future. Then this society, those people are going to be less able to be manipulated from the top down. Because you try to, for instance, the phrase like, give me liberty or give me death. The idea is, I'm going to risk my death, my material death, something that from an animal standpoint you'd be afraid of. I'm going to risk that for things like honor, for things like liberty, for things like freedom, for these higher virtues. So a society of people who are of an angelic mind, they're going to be dangerous to an elite that wants to manipulate them, an elite that wants to abuse them, an elite that wants to control them. So if you had a religion like Christianity that told people, hey, here's a thing called monogamy, here's a thing called marriage, we're going to repress your animal instinct to have as many partners as possible, or to only be with someone when you're happy with them. We're going to repress all those emotions, all those individual instincts. We're going to teach you to be self-sacrificing. We're going to teach you to be chaste. We're going to teach you to have that angelic mind. That population will be less susceptible to manipulation and abuse from the top, because they won't be so animalistic, they won't be so easy to be manipulated and abused. And that is why, basically, historically, when you see the fall of autocracy, when you see liberalization, when you see a middle class or an aristocracy rising up against despotism, when you see kind of basically the aristocracy saying to the king that, hey, we're landed aristocrats, we have rights, we want our rights codified, we want an equitable standard of law, we want all of these things for ourselves, they're coming from an angelic perspective. They're saying that we are a population of people who can't be abused, we can't be manipulated, because we know what's up. Because we are controlling our passions, we're not just responding to pleasure and pain. So we are organizing on behalf of our honor and our freedom and our liberty against despotism. But when you reverse that process, and people are no longer Christianizing, they're no longer becoming more spiritually mature, but instead they're becoming more animalistic. They're embracing sexual revolution. They're destroying marriage because they're saying that marriage is something that should be natural. Well, the fact is that what you think is natural is dependent on what side of the paradigm you're looking at. Are you looking at the animal side or the angelic side? Because from the animal side, marriage is not natural, okay? Humans are not biologically predisposed in their psychology to be monogamous. Monogamy is something that's imposed for economic reasons or spiritual reasons, or you're trying to preserve your lineage, or, there are a lot of reasons to get married. There are communal reasons to get married. There are cultural reasons to get married, but from an individual, animalistic standpoint, why get married? Why not just have a girlfriend or a boyfriend who you can stay with them with no commitment, and you can be with them when you want to, and you can leave them when you don't want to? And you can just play it by ear, and everything will be according to your passions in that capricious moment. So marriage is not natural from the animalistic standpoint. But from the angelic standpoint, it's a further structure added onto society to train people to become more angelic. And in fact, if you repeat this process enough, anytime that you have a cultural standard, anytime, you always have a genic effect on that population. What that means is that there are a lot of genes that influence your psychology. And if you expect a behavior out of people, for instance, if you tell a population of people that it is good to be strong, and you really enforce that to an extreme extent, then you will actually affect the genetic distribution with that population that affects their predisposition toward being strong. So whether it's their willful attitude to go to the gym, or whether it's just their muscle structure, the way that the muscle fibers grow, the way that they respond to nutrition. We can look at different subpopulations around the world, and we can say Samoans have a different response to a diet than Japanese people, who have a different response from Africans, who have a different response from Europeans. So we can look at these semi-isolated populations, not completely isolated, but there is a semi-permeable membrane known as geography that separates populations and that allows different pressures to compound themselves. So if I tell you that there's a societal standard to be strong that genetically impacts the population, kind of reinforces the standard. It's a positive cycle. It's a recursive cycle. So if we set this standard about marriage and monogamy, and we say people who get married and who are monogamous are good people, then that kind of sets a genic standard where now those people who are better able to fulfill that expectation are then more valued. Then that value allows them to have more selective ability in their mates. So let's say there's a person who is very angelic in their mindset, and this angelic mindset's valued. They're going to be thought of highly. More women are going to want to marry them, so they have a better pick, basically. So they could pick more attractive women. Now, picking a more attractive woman as your marriage partner is going to make your children have a higher chance of being more attractive. So by that very correlation of appearance, physical appearance, phenotype, beauty, outward beauty, to the mindset, to the psychology, what you're doing over time is you are creating a correlation between this angelic mindset and physical beauty. That's just a logical correlation that happens if you repeat this experiment enough times. Now, if you say, on the other hand, that what's valued is having lots of money, then maybe what happens is that the greediest people get the best looking women. And then over time, what happens is there's a correlation between greed and looking good. Now, at any one time, there's not just one selective pressure in society. There are multiple values that a society has, because there's always the struggle between the animal and the angelic. So when you look at an attractive person, you can't necessarily tell, are they going to be greedy? Are they going to be, angelic? You can't really tell. But theoretically, if you had high standards or important standards about human behavior, then those would ultimately come to be expressed in phenotypic correlations, basically. So, marriage is not natural. Marriage is not natural. Marriage is not easy. Marriage is really has never been about two people. Marriage is not about one person loves another person and so they want to get married. Marriage is about the relationship of those two people to the community. Marriage is about saying this man and this woman are no longer up for grabs. They are now taken. They are no longer available. And the ability to keep a marriage going and not to have it collapse and not to have it destroy your life and ruin your life and make you miserable, that is a psychological skill. That if you can persist in your marriage, then that shows something to the community about your ability to emotionally regulate, to work through relationships, to mediate problems and all those kinds of things, to be altruistic, to be other-focused. So marriage is a structure for the development of a population toward a certain mindset. Marriage does not benefit you a lot as an individual, although there have been studies done that say that, back and forth, that marriage might have a longevity effect, that being married might increase your lifespan or having kids might increase your lifespan, but then there's also evidence to the contrary. So the point of this is to say that the purpose of marriage is not contained within you as an individual. The purpose of marriage is to be found in collectives. And so if you're not part of a collective, then marriage doesn't really make sense. If you think of yourself as an atomized individual, then marriage doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, consider the fact that in the past, before the sexual revolution, there were all kinds of pressures on your ancestors to act and think a certain way in accordance with the institution of marriage. And so, as a result, your psychology is already sort of prefabricated to fit into the structure of monogamy. And so, for some people, it might feel natural, it might feel normal, but that's a spectrum. And everyone has a degree of animalism to them, and probably everyone has a degree of angelicism to them. But regardless, for a lot of people, marriage is not a natural next step. When you love someone, you get along with them, marriage is not a natural next step. Marriage has a purpose. Marriage is a creation of evolutionary forces, spiritual forces, but they're all larger than the individual. And so if you're not in tune with a community or a religion or a cultural framework, you're not part of a larger collective, then marriage doesn't really make a lot of sense. Again, ancestrally, you might have basically genetic pressures telling you to get married. But then if you're not in the kind of environment that your ancestors were in, a kind of environment that you have a society enforcing chastity, promoting chastity, punishing adultery, if you don't live in that society, then you're going to have a lot of a harder time than your ancestors. And I think that's why we see divorce rates rising, because people are still getting married because they feel like this is the right thing to do. I love this person, I want to get married, I want to have kids, all these things. I want all these things, but the society around you, the culture, the religious framework, the metaphysical atmosphere that we live in, the morphogenetic field, it is anti-marriage. It is anti-angelicism for the masses. Now, it's pro-angelicism for the elite. And that's what you don't see, and that's what you don't get exposed to a lot. But there is an angelic elite. And when we talk about the animal being solely focused on the moment, solely focused on pleasure and pain, and the angel being seen past, present, future, all in one, being above the capricious emotional framework, aspiring toward higher values, higher principles, then perhaps we could describe the elite as demonic, right? Because angelic we would associate with what is good. And angels are people who want to help you. Angels, like if you see an angel in a forest and you see like a dying little bunny or something, the angel wants to go and help the bunny. The demon is the one who wants to hurt the bunny. The demon is the one who is above the immediate emotional impulses that we all have, but the demon is sadistic. So instead of wanting to help people and lead people and grow people and help them mature out of their animalism and become angelic themselves, the demon wants to trap people in animalism. The demon wants to control people. The demon wants to manipulate people. And the demon does it from this principle of sadism and control and mastery over others, which means turning people into animals so that they can be the one ruling demon, the last demon, so to speak. And that, I think, is kind of the organizing principle of our society, is that you see a mass media which is instructing the average, ordinary mass person to be animalistic. But we know at the elite level, These people are crafty. These people are engaged in ritual. These people are very patient. These people have long plans. These people study history. These people investigate the future. These people are very interested in being slow and methodical and being exact and being scientific, being empirical, being dispassionate. And so the people who rule the world are not animals. The people who rule the world are then people who have an angelic ability, but they're using it to make the rest of the world more animalistic. That's the paradigm that we have. And so from my perspective, the angelic path seems like the better one, because you're taking people who are animalistic, who don't have sovereignty over themselves, and you're trying to bring them into this angelic path so that everyone can basically be equals in a way, that we can all be sovereign, that we can all be have control of our emotions. The animalistic path leaves you open to enslavement. And the demonic path is one that, it's a very harsh path, because there can really only be one at the end of the day. That the goal of the demon is to turn everyone into animals, to manipulate everyone's emotions so that you're the last one standing, and you can manipulate all of the animals. It's kind of like the farmer on the farm. You want everyone to be dumb and impulsive, and you're the only one who's cold, and you're the only one who's calculating, and therefore you have all the power. So that path is one that is not necessarily even hierarchical, because you still get an egalitarian mass of animal idiots, but you're at the top as the demon, right? And you know everything, and you're godlike in your ability to lord over all of these idiot masses. So, the angelic path, there is an egalitarianism about it, but it's a hierarchical. If you're ever moving away from the animal nature, and you're always moving toward the angelic nature, and there's always this process where babies are born and they basically start off in an animal state, and then you kind of have to educate them and rear them. And if you ever stop that process of lifting people up out of their animal state, then we just devolve back into that animal state. So you remove education, and demonic forces, have a play day with that. I think that's about all for now. Thank you for listening.